But in their sacred text, first problem is that Abraham had a kid named Ishmael. That's not our faith story. Our faith story just ignores Ishmael. In fact, our faith story says that God says to him, I'm going to bless you, you're going to be all right. Okay. However, that's not how the line is not going to go from Reggie to Reggie. It's going to go from Reggie to Matthew. Now, you can see them getting into it now, can't you? We're skipping all over him, and we're going to the second-born. The second-born, the firstborn was born to an Egyptian woman, an Egypt or Kemet woman. The second-born is to Sarah, and his name is Isaac. And his sons, twins, are Jacob and Esau. There is another problem in the sacred text when you look at who came out first, Jacob or Esau. Esau came out first. And Esau, in fact, that's what that whole primogeniture problem is in terms of who gets the blessing. When Jacob tricked his brother out of his blessing and tricked him out of his birthright, he was the firstborn, he was supposed to get everything. And Jacob tricked him. So this is a dysfunctional family we see very early in the sacred text. That Jacob usurps what Esau's supposed to get. He becomes the one who is blessed by Isaac to be the beneficiary of all of the inheritance. And Jacob ends up with 12 boys and one girl by 4 different women, one of whom is named Judah. The one named Joseph is the baby boy before he's sold into slavery. His brother Benjamin comes much later, after he's in Kemet, in slavery. He's sold by his brothers in our sacred story down into Egypt, down into Kemet, where he is in Potiphar's house. He goes to prison. He comes out of prison. He becomes the number 2 man in the country. He brings all his family down, and they're doing fine until the end of Genesis 50. When you turn the page from Genesis 50 to Exodus 1 in our sacred story, that is when the story of the new king, the new Pharaoh, arose, who did not know Joseph, knew nothing about that story, and put the people in slavery. God raises up Moses. Moses leads them out of Kemet. Footnote. Our folk, some of you all in this room today, our folk in Kemet this summer were shocked when Asa pointed out a historical fact as opposed to a theological fact, a historical fact as opposed to a sacred story fact, that in the history of Kemet, in all of their official records, and they kept documents that are still extant from 2,000-3,000 years BC, there is no record of slavery and no record of the Jews. And our members were saying, are we supposed to believe? And Asa said, I'm not telling anybody what to believe. I'm just telling you that the Egyptians don't have no record of this. That a sacred story has nothing to do with the scientific story in terms of how those cities got built that you read about in Exodus. That's their faith story. That's the way they tell their story. And to understand what that means, they also tell their story. And we're coming to that much further down on the outline. They also tell their story to justify them taking over somebody else's land. And not only taking it over, they say, go down and kill everything. Don't leave nothing standing that can piss against the wall. I was so glad when I found that word in my Bible. It's in the King James. It says in the King James, don't leave nothing standing that can piss against the wall. Now it's in the Bible. It was a Hebrew colloquial way of saying, don't leave any men. Don't leave any men standing, because that's how men urinate, up against the wall. And those of you who've been to Ghana, you see the big signs, don't piss here. Right on the wall, because that's how they go, right up against the wall. Women do not piss against the wall. It doesn't say kill the women. It says kill the men. The women are carried back as captives. But that's the kind of God. They're using, as they tell their story, go down there, take over these people and kill all of them. Kill all of them. But in their telling of the story, then Moses leads them out. Joshua leads them across the Jordan into Canaan, and they enter into a period of their history called the period in our sacred book of the judges. There is no king in Israel. They're a period of judges, women judges and men judges. And the judges did not rule over all of the different descendants of Jacob. They ruled over little parts, little teeny parts, their little part. The last judge in the history of the judges that we are given in our sacred text is a man named Samuel. And the people say to Samuel, we don't want no more judges, we want a king. We want a king, we want to be like other people. So for the first time in the history of these 12 loosely knit tribes, a king is anointed in the person of Saul. God withdraws God's favor from Saul. The second king that is anointed is a king named David. When David dies, the third king is a king named Solomon. When Solomon dies in our faith story, Rehoboam and Jeroboam become the kings. The kingdom splits. Jeroboam becomes the king up north in the northern kingdom where there are 10 tribes. Rehoboam becomes the king in the southern kingdom where there are 2 tribes. The southern kingdom has as its capital Jerusalem. The northern kingdom has as its capital Samaria. This shows you the tension set up between Jesus and the Samaritan woman in John 4 that's getting ready to happen. Many years later, it shows you the hatred between the folk down here and the folk up here, the folk up here and the folk down there. This northern kingdom is called Israel, after the 10 tribes. The southern kingdom is called Judah. The other little tribe down there is Benjamin, but it's a tiny tribe, about the size of Phoenix, Illinois, suburb of Harvey. So that you now have Israel and Judah in our sacred story. Over here, the sacred story doesn't follow this line, because over here, after Solomon, in fact, you got Samuel anointing Saul, Saul anoints David, David has a kid named Solomon, and then Makeda, the queen of the south, hears about Solomon and how wise he is and how rich he is and how gifted he is and how talented he is, and all those proverbs that he's collecting and writing. So she comes to see him. She comes up from the south, either in southern Arabia by Yemen, Y-E-M-E-N, or out of Ethiopia, the country of blacks. She comes up to Jerusalem, brings all this jewelry and all this money and all this gold and gives it to him and tests him to see how wise he is, and is amazed by how good his living is and how God, his God, has blessed him, she says to him. And she goes home saying that the half has not been told, Solomon. I heard a lot about you, but you really go over and beyond all that I've been told. You's a bad brother. Now that's the way our story stops. And Makeda goes on back home. Their story said, no, she went home with a little more than admiration. She went home with uterine fertilization. And she had a baby. And when she had a baby, his name was Menelek. M-E-N-E-L-E-K. That's in the Kabbalah Nagast. And Menelek, when Menelek got to be of bar mitzvah age, 13, that's the rites of passage where you move from childhood into adulthood. Because there weren't no Jews down there where she was, oh, by the way, excuse me, Jews, this is called, that's where you get the word Judaism. Judah, Judeo, Judaism. And the modern spelling leaves out the H. But in this period where Solomon and Makeda are hooked up, there's nobody to bar mitzvah him in Ethiopia. Nobody to bar mitzvah him in the south. So she sends him up to Jerusalem, where Solomon is. Solomon sees the kid. Solomon falls in love with the kid. And they hit it off. They bond. He's bar mitzvahed. And when it is time for him to go back home, Solomon wants to make sure that he is trained in the religion of his people, his faith people.